in general is a huge aspect of the educational and academic experience. I know sometimes you don't feel like it because you're not compensated at the rate maybe you think you should be for the work that you do, but the enhancement that you add to the academic experience can't even be measured. We have a lot of students that look to you as de facto mentors, sometimes even de facto parents. So thank you for being here. And if everybody could please mute. There we go. So I'm going to kick it off. We have a very special guest here today. We have a former first-round draft pick in MLB, also played for my favorite team, the Pittsburgh Pirates, for, I think, parts of 4 seasons. And he now lives in Washington State with his wife and his young children. And he's devoted his life now to helping coaches become the best version of themselves, to help parents become the best version of themselves, and to work with us all on this journey. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Travis Snider, who's with us this evening. Hi, Travis.
Zac, thanks for having me. And thank you to all the coaches. I know you guys sacrifice a lot in terms of time and energy in what you do to impact the kids and the teams that you coach. But it's really cool that you're taking the time out and that you guys have this program in place. And we're grateful that, taking our book, The Coaching Revolution, and starting to implement this into your guys' programs, I think is really the goal for us when it comes to helping find ways to support coaches with resources such as the Coaching Revolution. I've stayed up on kind of the timeline of things. I know you guys have gone through exercise 2 and exercise 3. The Watcher is the same exercise that we have in our parent guidebook, which can be confusing for some people. So, here shortly, I want to open the floor to see if there's any specific questions as to that exercise or exercise 3 that you guys have gone through. If I can answer any questions in regards to how to go through that process and how I think it's really meaningful. But I'll start off by saying, Zac introduced me as a former Major League Baseball player and a first-round pick. And I think as we think about the kids that we're coaching and my ultimate goal with 3 Athletics, which is the company that I co-founded with my partner, Seth Taylor, who is the author of the book that you guys have been provided. The really important thing for us to communicate to all coaches, parents, and players is that identity formation and really helping kids understand who they are versus what they do. And I think this, as you read through the Coaching Revolution, it's the same questions we need to be asking ourselves as coaches. What is our purpose? What's our why behind coaches? I think everybody on this call probably has a little bit different answer as to their why, of why they decided to coach and why they want to make an impact on the next generation of athletes. But keeping in mind, for us is our identity. It's easy for me to be introduced as a former Major League Baseball player the same way, you guys carry the title as coach in your respective teams and sports. And, for me, being able to lead from the front and lead by example. And that's really what this book is about, is giving you guys some exercises and some tools to go through and think through on a deeper level instead of just showing up with a practice plan and trying to execute that practice plan, taking it a step further and saying, what can we as the adults in this conversation who are impacting that next generation of athletes, how can we become a better version of ourselves? And for me as a parent, this has been incredibly impactful. I know I've talked with Zac throughout the season, and you guys have had some challenges with the parents and dealing with the parent drama, which is something we're all aware of, that in the coaching space of youth sports, there are a lot of parent egos that we got to deal with. And there's a lot of coaches' egos too, right? As a parent, I have an ego. As a coach, I have an ego. And the more that we can become aware of these things that we refer to as triggers, these moments during the game, whether it's a bad call by a referee or a parent coaching their kids from the sidelines or the stands, we're surrounded by this. We're immersed in this space, and it becomes very difficult for us at times to check in internally with ourselves and make sure that we're aware of these things that might be coming up for us, and then being able to identify those things and work through them. So again, as you guys have, if you've read through the book, if you've gone through the exercises, exercise 2 is the Watcher. It is really just that meditative experience of trying to understand, going through the process of coaching in the games or in the practice. What are those moments where you feel that emotional rise, where maybe you say or you do something that's out of character or not something that you're trying to create as the environment or the culture for your team? So I want to open the floor now. Does anybody have any particular questions as far as the Watcher exercise goes? Go ahead and raise your hand via Zoom or go ahead and unmute your mic and fire away.
I might call on a few people here, Travis.
Okay.
Coach Thompson, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can.
Travis, Coach Thompson, he's our treasurer and he's also our head football coach. And he just finished what I think almost anyone would deem a very successful season, but that successful season came with some challenges. Um, Bernie, what are some triggers that you see for some of your coaches and for some of the parents? What are some things that stand out that can get people, really heated? And then the things that maybe get you heated, how are you able to recognize that in yourself and kind of calm yourself down?
Yeah. First off, Travis, appreciate you talking to us today. This is a great thing. I think one of the biggest things I've noticed, this year with us, I mean, we had, you know, ended up the year winning 9 games, going 9-3 in the second round of the playoff, and the first time hosting a second round playoff game. So a little backstory. So it was a positive year, um, but it's not always positive from the outside. So I think again, what I've learned is wins and losses doesn't really define you as a coach, or define whether there's positive things going on inside or outside of your program. But I think my biggest takeaway this year was just staying consistent, staying level headed each week, and just having the mindset of watching my team and knowing the heartbeat of my team and knowing my leaders and meeting with my leadership council, and just having your finger on the pulse, and understanding that what they think and what they say and what they do inside the program is the only thing that matters. The outside noise does not. So I think I prided myself in really being aware of that from top to bottom, from what the coaches were saying, from what the players were saying, and just being aware of that message. So, we had a message at the beginning of the year, and we wanted that to end in a positive light through 12 weeks. And I think we really did. But I think some things that, can trigger a coach, and any coach, is just, the negative outside noise, right? Listening to parents and listening to people chirping from the stands. And if you have a bad game, understanding that it's not the end of the world, right? I think we lost to our rivals and we got beat by like 41 points. But, that was week 10. And if you would have talked to everybody after that game, you would have said the season's a disaster and we suck as players and coaches. But, you can't let that define you. And we came back and won a playoff game for the second time in school history, and then got to host a home playoff game and played a team that was supposed to beat us really, really bad. But we stayed positive and we didn't let that outside noise affect us. So I think that was just understanding the heartbeat, and sitting back as a coach, and knowing what the pulse of your players and your environment is.
Yeah, and just to jump in, I love what you said about meeting with your leadership council. I know Zach's a big fan of Clint Hurdle, who was my manager in Pittsburgh. And it was a big transition for me going from Toronto to Pittsburgh, the culture that they had built prior to me getting there. And during the 4 years or 5 years that I got to spend in Pittsburgh, seeing that kind of come to fruition. And one of the coolest things I learned from Hurdle was that leadership council, and having somebody within your position groups, right? So that you're not just looking at through a coach's perspective. You got to hear the feedback from the players, good, bad, or indifferent, and use your own filter, obviously, to make adjustments as you go through that season. But I tip my cap to you, because again, I'm sure this is more normalized in youth sports, but that was something growing up. We didn't have that communication between player and coach as much as I saw once I got over to Pittsburgh and saw the fruits of that labor.
Sure, absolutely. And I just want to add this too. I think this is the first year that we grew our leadership council. And I heard what our captains and our seniors had to say, all the way down to some of our freshmen, right? So just kind of hearing their voice and hearing their needs, and getting that feedback, I think, was crucial to our success this year.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think too, to add on the outside noise, again, at the highest level, right? You have tons of media coverage. You have the front office, which you guys have, Zach and people that you have to deal with on the leadership side of things, but really being able to insulate your club and make sure that they understand it's an us against the world mentality almost, because there's always going to be those outside opinions on what you should have done differently in a particular game or a particular play. But as you said, one game doesn't define a season. It's really a growth learning opportunity to take the good, take the bad, watch the film, do whatever you got to do to address those things, and then move forward to the next week without kind of carrying that into the rest of the season.
Absolutely.
Travis, when we talk about the triggers that we all have,
yep,
and we have mostly head coaches on here, a few assistants, how do head coaches help grow and develop their assistants so they can recognize those past experiences and past traumas, and how they can creep up and kind of derail a team?
Yeah, I think most of us on this call probably grew up playing in the, the 90s and early 2000s. There might be a few people who are older who grew up in, the 80s playing, but the old school way of coaching, right, it's not all bad, but I think what we've had to kind of understand and realize is as the generations continue to evolve, the emotional intelligence or lack thereof, however you would describe it, being able to communicate with players on a different level and connect with players. And I think that's something that the Leadership Council really can help with is taking in that outside voice outside of your coaching room from your players and being able to implement that and filter it into your decision making. But again, as we're talking about head coaches and assistant coaches, it's building that bond amongst your coaching staff, which I'm sure a lot of you are already doing, but encouraging coaches to understand that they're not a finished product. They're not perfect. And they're never going to be. But the way that we can start to work through these things and get better at them starts with kind of going through these exercises that we've outlined in the book, getting to those past experiences, recognizing how there's some really good ones, right? We all have played for great coaches, and we've taken some of that information, we've implemented it into our own style of coaching. The same way we got to take those negative things. And if we just ignore the bad stuff and we just continue to try and coach the way coaches did 10, 20, 30 years ago, I think that's where the resistance really hits instead of understanding. I think it's exercise 3, right? Where we talk about just some simple questions that you can ask your players about what you have for lunch. I know that's probably geared towards a younger generation, but just finding ways to connect with players on a human level, right? And then building that trust and making them feel safe to be able to go out there and try a new drill or focus on a skill that they need to continue to get better at and not feel like every time that they mess up that they're the worst person in the world. And I think building that personal connection starts with becoming more aware of the things that are going to trigger our emotional responses that might lead to us yelling at a kid in a moment where if we just went over there and put our arm around him or went over them and took them to the side and said, "Hey, how you doing? What's going on? But let's come up with a plan that's going to be execute. You can go on and execute without all that emotional attachment to being perfect."
Yeah, the emotional attachment's a big deal. And I think creating that environment where whether you're coaching kids or adults, the feeling that it's okay to fail. One of the things that always stood out to me, my son played ice hockey for about 6 or 7 years. He had a coach that played in the NHL for a little bit, and they would do the speed skating drills. And he would yell at them, "I don't see anybody falling. If you're not falling, then you're not pushing yourself enough to get faster." And that always stuck with me. Just that statement he would always say, encouraging the kids to fall so that they're pushing themselves harder.
Permission to fail.
Kay, our volleyball coach, are you with us? Maybe. Jerry Miller, can you hear us, Jerry?
I can hear you, but I'm at a basketball game and the noise is going to be too much to keep me on off mute.
All right, Jerry, before you get into your basketball game, just real quick, you had a chance to read the article. You've sent me some good feedback. What question would you have for Travis about, you said, your kids are grown, one thing that you would look at maybe doing different?
To me, the big thing is how do you take some of those tactics that were in the article and kind of get a parent that's kind of in the moment. In other words, a parent that's got their kids, in a sport right now. How do you get them to kind of step back for a second and ask some of those questions? A couple of things that really hit me was, Dr. Shutler, you were talking about your son and having that conversation about that first 20 minutes after a game where, there was maybe too much criticism. But then after the 20 minutes, you returned to dad and your son was talking about how he wished that would be more of the case. And I found that to be the case with my kids as well. So how do you get parents, how do you train parents to think that way and to realize it's okay to fail? As Bernie was just talking about a minute ago, it's okay to fail. I think I would have benefited from having some of these techniques as my kids were going through. So I guess the question is, how do you get this across to parents and get them thinking this way?
Yeah, so we have our parent guidebook, which is titled Hero, and that's the one Zach's referencing in the article that he wrote. It's very similar to what we have laid out for you guys in terms of the exercises and the goal behind it. And I think in a perfect world, right, we could get every parent a copy of Hero and say, "Hey, go through this experience. Our coaches are going through this. Ultimately, we're trying to build a more loving and supporting culture, which is going to benefit the kids' ability to go out there and experience the game and push through those failures on and off the field or the court and really understand what it's about. So I think it really comes down to communication and kind of setting the expectations. I don't know how many of you guys have an official parent meeting before the season starts, or what kind of communication you have before and during the season with parents. But I think encouraging parents, number one, to understand that being a parent's really hard, and watching your kid out there on the field, whether they're the star player or the last guy on the roster or girl on the roster, that it's an emotional experience. And let's not point fingers and point the blame and say the parents are the only problem or the coaches are the only problem. We're the adults in this. And I think the more we can build it as a partnership and outline some of these exercises or some of these tips, such as the car ride home, which is not one that we cover in this book, but we do have a free PDF on our website, which is www.3athletics.com. And we have a short 500-word, it's less than a 5-minute read PDF on the car ride home, and how important it is for us as parents and as coaches, right? The timing of these conversations and the way that we approach them. Parents have a little bit different role in this than the coaches do, but understanding in that moment what your child needs, and helping parents, giving parents permission, right, to take that step back and say, you don't have to coach your kids as soon as the game's over. You don't have to coach your kids as soon as you get in the car. It's our instinct as parents to want to teach our kids the right way to do things. And we want to impart all the wisdom that we have on our children. And it really takes away from the experience of understanding what the kids are feeling in that moment. So I think always drawing back to where is the appropriate time, what is the appropriate way to approach these things with your kids, and then encouraging your kids to build that connection with the coach. Because I think ultimately what we want all these young athletes to learn is how to communicate, how to speak their truth. And if it's an issue with playing time or if it's an issue with the position, to first of all understand coaches have a role in this, and there's a lot that's put on your guys' plate, and you're not going to be perfect and you're not always going to make the right decisions, but you do have a reason behind a lot of things that you do. And if we can communicate as coaches to those players directly with kind of removing the parent as the middleman, and being able to approach that and say, okay, here's a couple of things that we can really focus on over the next couple of weeks that we got to get better at, so you can earn your way into the lineup, or you can earn your way into that position. Or if it's a freshman or a sophomore, hey, if you want to be the starting varsity player in any of these respective sports, here are some things that you need to focus on, whether it's in the weight room or if it's skill, technique, tactical strategy on the court or on the field. And I think, again, helping parents understand there is a resource out there. I'm obviously biased to ours and say, hey, get every parent, signed up and going through this program. But at the end of the day, I think setting that expectation and the communication early in the season, from a place of building a partnership, instead of, I think what has happened a lot in youth sports, because so much stress has been put on you guys as coaches because of all this, the drama that parents can create. Just try to get ahead of that, right? And say, okay, here's the expectation as far as our program goes. Here's the expectation as far as communication goes between coach and parent, or player and coach. And here's some tips as you go through this process of watching your kid go out on the field or the court and try and perform to the best of their ability. This is a perspective we all need to have, that it's really hard. It's embarrassing. It's shameful when kids make a mistake. And if a parent or a coach is just constantly writing that kid in a negative tone and not really taking the moment to look at it as a learning opportunity every time they fail, and framing everything in that kind of growth mindset perspective, helping parents get to a place where it's understanding there's not going to be perfection. But if we allow our kids to fail and they know no matter what that they're loved and they're supported, that's going to free them up to go out there and really try and push through the adversity that sports are eventually going to bring.
I like the idea you shared, Travis, about being proactive. We could take some of these tools and some of these activities and maybe use them in our parent meetings. And I'd love to help our coaches maybe get that in place. We have
which section 2, which we haven't gotten into, I think, as I'm following along your guys' program. That's where we start to get into that. We call it the parent section. In section 2 of the parent guidebook is your coach, right? And it's outlining scenarios for parents to understand all the playing time, positional, all the things that are going to come up as forms of adversity for their kid. Let's get them thinking about these things ahead of time, so that if and when it does happen, we're all in a little bit better position to say, okay, we've touched on this, and here's a more appropriate way to go about it, by setting the example and modeling the behavior that we want our kids to ultimately learn and carry on with them long beyond their days of playing sports.
Travis, you want to talk to the coaches a little bit about the watcher activity? That's one that I struggled a little bit with fully understanding it, but it was also probably the most impactful once I distanced myself from the emotion and just picked up on my own feelings.
Yeah. So for me as a parent and for me as a coach, it's a matter of understanding how we're wired. Every one of us has a different past experience or past experiences that we're bringing into this. And it's the first exercise is to get you thinking about those past experiences. Now, the second exercise is taking that first exercise and saying, okay, as I'm going through my day to day routine of coaching in practice or coaching in the game, what are these situations that are coming up for me where when I sit down and reflect on a hard day practice or a game, whether we won or lost, and we're looking for ways that we can improve, where are those moments that every one of us has as human beings where we might do or say something that is not reflective of what our ultimate goal is for building a culture and connecting with our players? So I think it's really, we call it a meditative exercise. It's tough in the game, in the moment, to sit there and take notes on all these things. And that's what we encourage the parents to do, sit in the stands and actually sit down and write what's coming up for you in that moment, whether it's, you know, your son's playing shortstop and he boots a ball, or your kid's playing quarterback and he fumbles a snap, or the receiver doesn't run the right route, or whatever the situation is. Just taking stock of where these things are starting to come up for you and then looking for the patterns, right? And I think for most of us, we don't understand or we don't think about this consciously. So we have the subconscious mind, right? And emotions that we're constantly focused on just what's in our head. And this is really trying to get you to that next level of understanding, okay, where are these moments within the game, within practice, where I feel like I'm losing a bit of my control over my emotions. And most of us are aware enough to see when a coach or when a player shuts down, right? If we come at them hard or we hit them with a super technical drill that we want them to focus on, but they don't really understand the purpose behind it or the why behind it, or maybe they just don't feel that connection with us. So it's really just finding a time probably best suited after practice. If you can take notes and you do take notes during practice or a game, just say, oh, I remember on this particular play or this particular situation, you know, this kid did this and my reaction was this. And keeping notes of that over the course of 3 to 5 games, and then being able to go back and revisit that and say, where are these patterns at, right? Where are the moments that I am not being the best version of myself? Again, nobody's going to be perfect here, but if we could all sit down and take some time to reflect on that and then start to dive a little bit deeper into why do we think that's coming up for us and how can we be more prepared the next time the shortstop boots the ball or the receiver runs the wrong route? How can we connect with that player in that moment in a different way that's going to lead to that impact and connection that we're looking for from a coaching standpoint?
Travis, we had some of our administrators take the Gallup Clifton Strength Finder. And what I've noticed for me, if I take a look at my strengths, those strengths can also be my trigger. So my number one strength is achiever. I think my number 2 or 3 strengths is responsibility. So I notice in my superintendent role, if things don't go the way I want them to go, that achiever strength becomes a weakness. I notice that when somebody questions my, ethics or my ability to get things done on time, that responsibility strength becomes, a trigger for me.
Yep.
Does that sound like something that makes sense?
Oh yeah, this applies to my marriage. This applies to my marriage. This applies to my parenting. This applies to the way that I coach. And I think, again, we're humans. We all have our own experiences that we're bringing into this. We all have our strengths and we all have our perceived weaknesses. But for me, it's understanding how to leverage those strengths and how to leverage those weaknesses by becoming aware of exactly what you said, how this can be a double-edged sword, to have this type of responsibility or accountability that we find to be the most important things to us, which are great life skills that we want to impart on the kids that we coach and the people that we're around, but understanding where we cross that line. And all of us are going to do it at some point during the season. We're just humans, right? But the more that we can become aware of that and identify those moments and prepare for the next one, it's just like we're trying to teach the kids how to get better at those skills. We got to take ownership and decide, okay, these are the things that I need to focus on as we're going through this. Doesn't mean you're going to fix it the first time you go back out there and do it, but awareness is that first step, and then putting in the work to make those changes is ultimately what's going to lead to success.
Yeah, if we're not aware of our own feelings, our own emotions, our own actions, then we cannot make any change. And that was one of the main reasons I wrote the article. One, it held me accountable. Plus, I think I'm pretty average when it comes to my IQ and all the other things. I'm kind of an average Joe. And if I'm struggling with these things, I know other people are. We have somebody on the call tonight who serves kind of a dual role for us. Coach Hess, can you hear me, Jimmy? Jimmy's our head baseball coach, but he also has the pleasure of coaching his sons and has a son on his staff. So, Jimmy, anything?
I think the longer I'm in as the head coach, trying to do a better job of, I'm that old school guy that he's talking about. I played in the 80s, and I played for guys that would, really rip you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to figure out a way to combine being that old school coach along with a new way of doing things. I think with our parents, I think we did a great job in football, and I know Coach Delman does in basketball, and I'm trying this in baseball. I think by going through our players and our kids to maybe condition and teach our parents how to act a little bit. I
Yep.
think we made strides on that with our kids understanding that, okay, within these four walls or between the lines, certain things are going to happen, and we're going to talk about them. There's going to be some intense moments. But I think our kids are really starting to buy in, and I may be naive to think this, but I keep thinking hopefully this will go, it'll go towards our parents, and maybe they'll think, well, wait a minute, our kids understand this. Maybe we should understand too what the coaches are doing.
Yeah, and I love how you say it, man. There's so many good things about the old school way of coaching that we don't want to lose sight of all those things. But I think ultimately, the more we can connect with players on a personal level, so that when you do have to get intense and you do have to have those moments where you're setting that tone, that isn't always the nice, hey, everything's going to be okay, because that's not the way the world works. But at the end of the day, understanding every individual is a little bit different the way they receive this information. The more that we can plug into those leadership groups, the more that we can plug in on that individual connection. Obviously, you guys have a lot of kids depending on what coach or what sport you're coaching. So it's difficult if you're a football team that has 50 kids on there. It's tough to make that personal connection. But that's, again, where we got to rely on our positional coaches and kind of lead from the top with this and saying, hey, who are the kids here that we know we have to just kind of pull aside and approach them in a little bit different way when it's more of an individual moment of teaching, and then saying the overarching themes or the things that we're really trying to quantify as what makes us different and what builds this program to be tough, to be gritty, to have accountability. All those things is really built on that foundation of identity. And that's something we come back to a lot, where a lot of these kids are going through the high school experience where it's like, are you popular? Are you good looking? Do you have a girlfriend or boyfriend? Are you, what is your social status, right? And then you come into the world of sports, and it's like, how good are you at sports? What are you being viewed as? And helping kids understand that you're buying into something greater than yourself when you're on a team, and there are the characteristics that you want your team to embody every time they step on the field. But I always would encourage people who, you've been doing this longer than I've probably been an adult, right? So I want to be respectful when I speak to you, but I also say, hey, I had so many great coaches that were old school coaches that I was able to connect with because I was built a little bit different than some of the other kids on my team. But whenever those old school coaches went that extra mile to connect with me or to connect with the positional groups and get that feedback, I think that's what opens up that floor for then you to be able to sit there and say, okay, I might need to drop the hammer on them, but how can I do this in a way where it's going to be received in a positive, constructive way versus like, man, coach is always yelling at me. And that was our experience with our high school coach. I connected with him really well, but I played football. He was an offensive line coach, so we had a different relationship. And I talked to my buddies about their experience, and it's completely different. And I think that's where being able to connect with the individuals as much as possible. I know in baseball, you probably got 15 or 20 kids that you're dealing with on a daily basis, but your assistant coaches are your your right and left hand men and women that are going to be out there on the field with you, connecting with these players to ultimately build that winning culture that isn't just the dictator and then everybody below them. It's like we all got to pull on the rope the same way.
I always try and go back after those intense moments and down the road and try to explain to those players, why that was an intense moment.
Yep. And repair is huge, right? As a parent, as a coach, and all of our relationships, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to get too intense. That's just part of being a human being, right? But the more that we're able to repair that and then become aware of those situations before they happen the next time, think through it a little bit, right? Just in your planning for practice or game situations. Say, okay, how could I potentially approach this differently to really make that connection and get the point across and get this athlete to go out and execute at a higher level or not miss a sign or whatever it is. I just know for me personally, and for a lot of people who have played sports, I'm sure you can relate, when you get singled out and just get destroyed in front of everybody, that was very common 15, 20, 30 years ago. Now, how can we bring that into that environment to where we're encouraging kids to go out there and make mistakes, but we're going to make sure that we learn from those mistakes and we make the adjustments moving forward.
I think that 20 minutes that Mr. Shutler talks about, on the ride home, that could almost go with the coaching staff as well. After a hard loss on a baseball field, you go through the line, you shake hands, and the next thing you know, you're out in right field, and it's on you almost too quick.
Yep.
It almost a 15-minute breather would be good for the coaching staff as well.
Yeah, and how you can build some of that into the post game, and how you can build that into before the next practice or that next game.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
Travis, I know you have to wrap up. One thing before we close, I really like the story you share about when you get so caught up in that performance-based mindset, and you share the story about how you made it to the majors and then you got sent down. Can you talk to the coaches a little bit about the dangers of being so tied up in the wins and losses that you lose your sense of self?
Yeah, I think it's what we touched on with the football team, right? You lose a big rivalry game, and that can mean a lot to the community. That can mean a lot to your team, to your coaching staff. It feels like a huge failure. But again, the more we can zoom out and take that 10,000 foot view and say, okay, what does this really mean in terms of what we're trying to build over the course of a 12 or a 25 or a 30 game season? It's merely an opportunity to learn. And as much as the emotions are going to rise for us in that, for me getting sent down, so much of my identity was built on my success, because from 9 years old to 18 years old, I was the best player on my team. I was the best player in the state of Washington. I was an all-state, all-American, first-round pick, right? I checked all the boxes in terms of a storybook youth career, got to the major leagues at 20 years old, and I thought I was going to play for 20 years, make all this money, and then my ego starts taking over in terms of creating these external expectations instead of saying focus on, okay, this is the ultimate goal, but I need to stay focused on what I need to do. What are these next steps, right? If you lose a tough game, or you have a bad at bat, or you go out there and whatever role you're playing in whatever sport, we're going to make mistakes. And if our identity is tied only to the achievements and the successes, that's going to make the valleys, the peaks and the valleys we always hear about in coaching and in playing. It's going to make those valleys much deeper, and it's going to make those peaks much higher. We're just trying to keep this thing steady over the course of an extended season, right? Where it's not, I had one great game, now I'm the best player in the world. I got to stay focused on, okay, what did I do well? What can I do better? How can I game plan for this going into the next practice or the next game, and have a plan to be able to execute that instead of getting caught up in the wins and the losses, or, losing the rivalry game where, hey, we see it all the time in the NFL, man. The great team goes and beats another great team, and then that next week they're playing that opponent that's not quite as good as them. They're still kind of riding that high from the victory, and then all of a sudden, now we're playing down to our competition. We're getting beat by somebody who's better than us. So that's really where I preach the 10,000 foot view in terms of the season and what our ultimate goal is, and really helping athletes understand that the successes and the failures are just a part of this. Who we are is not attached to that, right? And that's a hard thing to do when winning and losing becomes such a big deal. Now, of course, we all want to have winning seasons. We want to have success and go out and achieve things like, second round of the playoffs, hosting, all these cool things that we can talk about. But those are a product of staying in that moment and understanding where the carrot is on that stick, and how to keep your players focused on what we need to do next to get to that long-term goal. We got to stay focused on the present.
Now, Travis, who helped you through that? When you get sent down, you ultimately make it back to the major leagues. Were you cognizant of that as a young 20-something, or how did you bounce back?
I struggled with it the rest of my career. And I talk about that being kind of the defining moment of my career, where I didn't know who I was, what made me safe, what made me love, what made me valuable. Because I had just started to read all the articles. I had started to read Baseball America and all these publications that were posting me as a top 5 prospect in sports. And again, being able to put those earmuffs on, the headphones on, and just stay laser focused on what you got to do. And then when the season's over, yeah, we can look up and we can celebrate all the great things that we achieved. And if we didn't, we can sit there and evaluate what we need to do better going into the next season. But for me, it became a real emotional attachment to my stat line, my batting average, my slugging percentage, how many home runs I hit, instead of, hey, what do I need to do today to be prepared to go out there and be the best version of myself? After the game, I'm going to take a shower, I'm going to wash it off, right? And then when I come to the field the next day, I'm going to have a plan to go out and execute, instead of focusing on what somebody wrote about me in this particular article, or what this scout or what this front office person's saying about me. And that's that outside noise that we talked about with the football team. Is like, there's going to be the highs and the lows, and there's going to be all these opinions. But the more we can insulate the group, the more we can keep it about us and not everything that's outside of that, and create that culture where we understand we're going to show up every day and we're going to put in the work. And that's what's going to lead to success.
Travis, thank you. Any last questions for Travis before I let him go? I know he's got his kids coming home from school and it gets busy for you.
Yeah, if they start yelling, don't mind, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you guys got any.
Mr. Daly, high school principal, we put you on the spot, but we've had a lot of different, parent issues this year. Do you have any thoughts about how this book can even help a principal kind of work through this process?
I think a lot of it has to do with, one thing is when I coached, and one thing I always focused on, and as a coaching staff that we focused on and communicated to the kids, is we talk about that outside noise. And one thing that we tried to maintain focus on is we're the ones that are there every day. And we're the ones that know the work that goes into it, what we're capable of and what we're incapable of. You have to let that outside noise just sometimes go in one ear and out the other, and reiterate when that outside noise happens to the team, to the rest of the staff, that we're the ones that are here every day. We're the ones that put in the work. We know what we can and can't do. You got to ignore some of that other stuff. And also, we talked a little bit about a couple other things here that kind of sparked my thoughts. And that was always kind of sandwiching the positives, and taking pause. Taking pause is real important in those times when you get in the heat of the moment. Take pause, focus on something positive, get to the things we got to work on, ending with something positive. And that's something, that I did as a coach, and something I even do now as an administrator, in working with teachers, and working with kids. But yeah, there's a lot of things as a principal you take from, these conversations, to help coaches along to deal with things, but also communicate to the parents as well that, these guys are there every day. They're putting in a lot of time, a lot of effort. They're not doing things on purpose. They
Right.
care a lot, and they're doing the best job they possibly can.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would finish with a couple of things. One, detachment is what you're referring to, right? Learning how to detach, and it's easier said than done. I still struggle with this as much as I preach it, but in those moments, becoming aware of those moments that are going to come up for you or have come up for you, and then how can I detach from this? How can I shift the thinking from negative to positive to be able to build that connection, and then be able to drive in what is the actual message we're trying to get across here, removing that emotion that sometimes takes it to that level that's not going to be received in a productive or constructive way. And then for me, having parents, right? You guys all have to deal with parents on a daily basis, or on a weekly basis, depending on how things flow. And understanding what the parents are going through, right? First and foremost, as much as they can be a pain in our backside as coaches because they want to impart all their opinions. But like you said, it's coaches are the head of an energy field. When you think of a team and all your players and all your coaches, we have the ability to affect that energy field the same way I do as a husband when I lead my family. And I'm constantly reminded, whether it's my wife or my kids, when I make these mistakes, if I'm coming into it with that negative energy, if I'm coming into it and not allowing myself a moment to detach and really think and process before I come in and say, hey, this is what we got to do, more often than not, my wife's going to tell me to beat it. I don't want to hear it, right? Or my kids are going to look at me and be like, oh, okay, dad, and go do the exact opposite. And I think, again, for all of us as human beings, this is something we're going to struggle with on a daily basis. But the more that we can become aware of it, the more we can plug into the idea that we are the leaders of that energy field, and the downstream, the trickle down effects that has. It's setting that tone and helping your players understand this, and encouraging your parents to get behind the players and the coaching staff and saying, hey, this isn't easy, but as a coach, I'm not going out there trying to make mistakes. As a player, these kids aren't going out there and trying to make these mistakes. Let's all recognize that we're human beings in this process, and it's going to make things a little bit easier for everybody to digest.
Travis, go ahead.
I have a quick question since he's in the baseball field. So the last couple years we have noticed players with the perspective of, so say it's the number 2 hitter and her batting average is 215 and the 3-4 hole is 4-500, and that girl's parents are frustrated because she's not hitting, but she's doing her job to move the runner. Or how as in your span of playing, how have you seen coaches handle that differently, where you try to explain to the kid like you're doing your job. I don't care if you hit 100, you're doing your job. You're important to that lineup, to
Yep.
where, the parent is like, no, they're not, or other parents are complaining and griping about Susie ain't got a hit in 20 games and she
Yep.
leaves her in the number 2 slot.
Yeah, again, you guys as coaches are making these decisions because you feel convicted to make that decision the way you make it. So some of it is that outside noise that we just got to learn to filter in, filter out. Some of it is that connection with the player and understanding, or getting them to understand what their role is in whatever position in the lineup they're at. And I think, again, there's an attachment that I dealt with, whether I came all the way through being a 3-4 hitter. And then when I got to the major leagues, I was in the 8 and 9 hole and I was hitting behind the catcher, who was the slowest guy on the team. And I might get 2 at-bats off the starter, and then I'm facing the nasty lefty out of the bullpen being a left-handed hitter. And it's like, man, this doesn't feel like it's setting me up for success. But I also really look back on these conversations that I had with guys like Clint Hurdle and our hitting coaches. Meeting the demands of the game ultimately is what leads to wins and losses and success on the field. And the demand is not always, we need you to get a hit. So I think ultimately you're preaching this message from day one with your team to understand that every player on this team has a role that they're going to fill. And those roles are going to change. There's going to be ebbs and flows, whether the batting order changes or not. There's a reason why we're making these decisions, and here's what our expectation is for every hitter in our lineup, right? It's not every hitter is going to hit 400, but we have to be able to piece together a lineup that's going to lead to the ultimate success of being able to execute a bunt or get a runner over. Situational baseball and softball, just like every other sport, is incredibly important. And I think most parents don't understand at that level that you guys do as coaches. So again, taking what they say with a grain of salt, is as tough as that may be at times to manage kind of the outside noise. It's the man or the woman in the arena, the person who's actually in the box or in the coach's box making these decisions. You have your coaching staff around you, and sure, there's time for reflection, and maybe we need to switch something up because it's not working. But if there is a particular role that a player is filling, whether their batting average is 100 or 400, and they're allowing us an opportunity to do certain things, tactically speaking, that are going to help our team win a game, that's what's most important, right? At this stage where you guys are at with varsity sports and junior varsity sports, some of it is still, it's development of players at the lower levels, but at the varsity level, we're trying to put the best players on the field and go out there in 1 through 9. We're going to have an approach that it might not look sexy in the box score, but at the end of the day, we know what's producing runs for our team. We know what's giving us opportunities to move runners over and ultimately win baseball and softball games.
Great question, Melissa. Any other last questions or words before I let Travis go? Travis, can't thank you enough. I hope you know how much this means to me and our staff. We're trying to do something unique at Union Local. I've always felt that our coaches are underserved when it comes to professional development and support. We hire them, we throw them out there, and then sometimes we throw our hands up when they don't handle situations the way we would as maybe a principal or superintendent. So I hope they see the value in the program and giving up their time, because coaches don't always get the compensation they deserve either. So asking them to give up even an hour on their evening is greatly appreciated by me. So Travis, final word before you go.
Yeah, thank you guys for what you're doing. I know it can be a thankless job, and as Zac mentioned, you might be underpaid and overstressed with the roles that you're in. But that 10,000-foot view, think about the generational impact that we can have as coaches, right? And how we can connect with these players and help them develop these life skills that, you might not have one kid that's going to go on and play at the next level, but there's probably a few of those kids, right? They're going to be in that coach's position, whether it's in 5 or 10 years, and that wisdom that we can impart on them. And the more that we can model that behavior, saying we're not perfect, we're going to continue to work on the things that we're not good at, the same way we're going to continue to hammer the fundamentals and the things that we are really good at. But ultimately, I'm just grateful to be on this call with you guys, because I know, the impact that coaches have had on my life is substantial. I'm still very close with my high school baseball coach, my high school football coach. So don't overlook your ability to impact those players, as frustrating, as difficult it might be, given the circumstances that you're in, dealing with what you got to deal with. So thank you guys. Thank you, Zac, and to you guys for bringing us into your program and giving us an opportunity to try and help make an impact on what you're doing. And ultimately, what's most important in all this is that kid's experience.
Travis, we'll keep working through the book. Any place you'd like to direct them to find out more information about how they can learn to better reflect as a coach, and also how they can help their parents better understand their role on the team?
Yeah, I would say, like I said, 3athletics.com is our website. We got a couple of free PDFs right up there right now talking about performance and anxiety, as well as a car ride home, which I think are two things that parents can really resonate and relate to. But ultimately, helping them understand how difficult it is to be out there on the field trying to perform in front of everybody, whether they're 13, 14 years old or they're 18 years old. There's a lot of pressure that comes with these outside expectations. So the more that we as the adults, especially the parents, can stop projecting that stuff on our kids, it's ultimately going to free them up to go out there and pursue things that are going to involve successes and failures without that feeling like if I blow a game or I miss a pitch or make an error, that the world's coming to an end. And just remember how difficult it was when we were all going through that high school experience, because it's not easy.
Thank you, Travis. Team, if we could stay on, I'm going to let Travis go. Travis, happy Thanksgiving to you and your family.
You guys have a wonderful holidays.
I'll reach out after this and thank you for helping us out.
Sounds good, guys. Best of luck moving forward. And if I can be a resource, don't be afraid to reach out.
Thanks, Travis.
Thank you.
All right, before we close up, I just want to thank everybody for giving up some time in their evening. I highly value the job that you do as coaches. And our fall sports season just ended. I think we had a lot of success from cross country to volleyball to football, cheering. A lot of people did a lot of great things, but we also had some significant challenges. We had some adult issues that we had to navigate through, and I commend our head coaches for doing one hell of a job navigating us through some of those challenges. Also, our administrators. So I hope we put these things together to support you. I know when I was a young coach coming out of college, 23, and coaching junior high and varsity football, I wasn't an expert on how to handle things, and I don't know if I had the right kind of support to help me handle those things. So just trying to put those things in place for you. And just want to thank you for the job that you do. Any questions for me before we go?
No, but again, I would like to thank you guys for the support that you've given me. I really appreciate it. Like you said, it was a tough year with parents, but with your support and encouragement and advice, I got through it.
Thank you, Kay. We all need each other. It's an ecosystem. It's not every man or woman for themselves. We all need to help each other. We all need to support each other. Coaches need to support each other. Our coaches have to coach our younger coaches. And it starts with me as a superintendent. I have to be willing to help, and that's why I put these in place. I shared with you guys the article that I wrote about my experience as a dad. I don't sit here in a glass house and throw stones. There are 1,000 different ways I could be a better parent in relationship to my kids' experience with sports. I shared that because I thought it would help other dads and moms who struggle with the same thing that I struggle with. And I think the biggest thing I want to get across is that this book right here, if you read through it and do the exercises, the better you know yourself, the better you'll be at de-escalating situations, both with yourself, with parents, with your players. Because in the heat of the moment, when the game is at a fever pitch, it's hard to press pause if you haven't done the work beforehand. The best time to learn how to swim is before the waves start crashing. If we know ourselves, we can kind of navigate ourselves through this situation. And there's going to be times where I might lose my mind as superintendent. It's going to happen. It does happen. But knowing that I have, people like Ray Rotino, Tom Daly, Jamie Yannick, Nick Nardo around me that know who I want to be. They know my character, and they can say things to me that I've shared with them, whether in the book or things that I've written to say, hey, Zach, remember, control what you can control. Hey, remember, it's very important to be a good teammate. Hey, have you been taking care of yourself? Have you gotten enough sleep? Have you gotten enough to eat? Are you exercising? You look tired. All of our core values come into play in those scenarios, and that helps hold each other accountable because we have to be willing to coach and support each other. Anything else for the good of the order before we go? I will cut this video and share it with all the coaches. The coaches that couldn't be here tonight due to practice or scrimmage games, I'll share this and give them an activity, a little homework to do. For those who are on the call, no homework for you. So you took time out of your night to be here. And make sure you're working through this book. I think it has a lot of value. Make sure you're working through it with your assistant coaches and ultimately getting to the point where we can help our parents identify those things that set them off so they can better help our program, but most importantly, help their own kids, because it's something all dads and moms struggle with, including myself. Appreciate you guys. I'm going to get back to what we're doing here in Maryland. My wife and my brothers, we got a house down here and we're hanging out, and we didn't have any Wi-Fi. So my wife had to drive me to a local hotel. So I had Wi-Fi so I could do this meeting. So she's probably super happy with me right now. All right, guys, have a good evening. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Dr. Shelley.
Good night.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good time.
See you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernie.